everyone, and good evening. You are watching the New Jersey Coastal Coalition's Tidal Flooding Talk. I'm with my co-hosts tonight, Joe Martucci and Dan Skeldon, and my name is Palma Shiles. We are brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition and Triax 57.
Awesome. Well, good evening, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great Tuesday. It is April. They say April showers bring May flowers, and we are really hoping for some April showers and maybe some April downpours as we go forward this month. We're going to talk about drought. So the opposite of flooding for this episode, drought, but it is important. It is important for the Jersey Shore specifically, and we'll get into the numbers and stuff, but we have been in drought for a number of months. We've dug out of it as we went to the beginning of March, but we're going to need to keep that positive momentum as we go into the spring, right, Dan?
Yeah, and it's one of the longer lasting droughts. Droughts are possible anywhere in the country. Obviously, they're more common out west. We have the four seasons. Patterns change here on the East Coast a lot. So we're not immune to long-lived droughts, but this is one of the longer ones that I can remember, at least in the past couple of decades. I think you got to go back to 2002, I believe, where you had this type of drought for this long a stretch. So, it's not something that happens every year. And the old saying is it takes a while to get into a drought. And it did. It took a while. It took months of drier than average patterns and rainfall totals to get into this drought, and it is going to take a while to get out of the drought too. One soaking rain doesn't do it. You need multiple ones, ideally spaced out over an extended period of time, because if you get too much rain too quickly, then you talk about the opposite of drought, which of course is flooding.
I know exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that people underestimate drought risk because it is less dramatic than other weather conditions that we see?
Well, it's interesting you say that, Palma, because during the winter, people don't think of drought. I mean, let's be honest. I don't think of drought every day during the winter, right? But drought can occur any time of the year. And over this past winter, we were dry. I mean, January was the third driest on record for the state. February was also very much on the drier side here. March likely in above average in terms of precipitation, so that's good. But yeah, I mean, it can kind of catch people a little bit off guard. But I think in a silver lining to this situation, I think as we went into winter, everyone knew, hey, we're in drought, because we started with this drought in September. We really peaked with drought in late November. And we've kind of just either stayed steady or slowly dug out of it since then. And we should back up and say, how do we know about drought? Well, there's two ways in New Jersey. There's the United States Drought Monitor, which is freely accessible to anybody. That's just the facts. It's taking into account what's happened, what water conditions are, and saying we're in either a moderate drought, which is a D1, a severe drought, which is a D2, an extreme drought, which is a D3, or an exceptional drought, which is a D4. Now, to make a really long story short, most of the Jersey Shore was in an extreme drought, a level 3 for most of the winter. The only exception was Monmouth County, but Monmouth County, along with most of the rest of the state, was in a severe drought, or a D2. Then there's the policy side of this, and that comes from the NJDEP, Department of Environmental Protection. They issued a drought watch for the state in October, and then went to a drought warning right around the middle of November. I don't have the exact day off the top of my head. I think it was November 12th. Now, that means there's voluntary water restrictions across the state, and the state can move reservoir levels or control reservoir levels a little bit more. But as Dan and and Palma, if you're in the southern part of the shore, it's not reservoir water where you get your drinking water. It's the groundwater from the Kirkwood-Cohansey Aquifer, which sits underneath most of the pine barrens.
Right. Now, how often is that website that you mentioned updated? Is that live information as to the current status of the drought?
Yeah,
The Drought Monitor, anyway, is is updated once a week throughout the year. Every Thursday morning, a new drought monitor map comes out. Now, it doesn't take into account the rain through Thursday morning, because what they have to do is they have to, analyze all the data, see how much rain fell, not only in New Jersey, but they do the map for the entire country, analyze stream flows and, a lot of different types of water impacts. So it factors in the rain that fell through Tuesday morning. So the rain that did fall through Tuesday morning to Tuesday morning will be factored into the drought monitor that comes out 48 hours later on Thursday morning. And as Joe said, yeah, we've seen some improvements, but we're still in a drought, a severe to extreme drought through a lot of South Jersey, a moderate drought for a lot of North Jersey. And we're hoping for improvements because, as the warmer you get, as we get through the spring, the easier it is to dry out the fuels. And while winter drought kind of goes unnoticed, in spring, that notice is exponentially increasing as agricultural season gets underway, as water usage goes up. As people start to water their lawns, they want the nice green lawns, the gardens, the flowers. You bet that while we don't pay attention to drought in the winter, we pay extreme attention to it as spring unfolds and eventually turns into summer.
Yeah, totally. And just to tack on to Dan, when during the winter, and let's say we're going to say the cooler season. So from October to March, really you need about 3/4 of an inch a week of rain or melted snow to just kind of stay steady. And then you need about an inch of rain or precipitation a week to dig out of drought. Once you get to April, that goes up a little bit. Now you're talking about an inch of precipitation a week just to stay steady, and about 1.25 inches to dig out of it. And then here's the other thing too. Once we get to, May and June and July, we don't get those big soakers. Nor'easter season goes away, coastal storm season goes away. And we're getting a lot of these pop-up thunderstorms. And I wrote this in a Shore Local article I did down at the South Jersey Shore. If you get 3 inches of rain in Atlantic City, that's great for Atlantic City, but you need that widespread rain. And that just gets harder to come by as you go, May, again, June, July, and especially August, September, and October as well. Just one other thing, too. It's kind of funny because, as Dan said, that data goes through Tuesday, but the maps updated on Thursday. So it confused a number of people, when on March 5th, which was a Wednesday, we saw 1 to 2 inches of rain, but the drought monitor had no update to it. It wasn't until the following week that we did see a reduction in drought there.
Now, what causes a dry pattern along the Jersey Shore?
Well, it depends on the time of year, but in the winter, lack of coastal storms and drought and coastal flooding can, we can kind of connect the two because we're not getting the nor'easters, we're not getting the tidal and coastal flooding, and we're not getting the rain from nor'easters. I mean, we really haven't had any big soaking 1 to 2 inch rainfall events or a foot snow events with a lot of heavy wet snow and water in there. So, in the wintertime, it's lack of nor'easters. In the summertime, it can be lack of severe thunderstorms, lack of cold fronts, and just a hot, dry pattern. And where the jet stream's going, the river of air that steers our storms acts as a thermostat, keeps warm and cold separated, and drives these storms. If the jet stream stays away, a lot of the time the storms stay away as well.
All right. Well, thank you, Dan. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back.
Thanks to the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, your flood insurance bills are lower and your streets safer from the reality of flooding. Since beginning in 2013, we build more resilient shoreline communities. Our member towns develop and share in best practices that anticipate future concerns and create flooding solutions. From our town-specific free web app for flooding information to our weekly Tidal Flooding Talk show, we focus on flooding 24/7. Visit www.njcoastalcoalition.com for more.
Welcome back. You're watching Tidal Flooding Talk. I'm here with Joe Martucci and Dan Skeldon, and we're talking about the current drought we're all experiencing. Joe, to kind of bring back the flooding aspect, when it does finally rain when we are in a drought, can that cause even more, nuisance flooding or the impact of the flooding be worse because of a drought?
Yeah, so it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It does raise the threshold for how much, the ground can soak up because it's dry. On the same time, though, the ground is dry and it's like a it's like a dry sponge. So, you have like that really crispy sponge, you put it under the faucet, and like that first 2 seconds, everything just kind of like runs over the sponge. It doesn't get absorbed into the sponge. You can get that too if you have a significant amount of rain. However, this is a New Jersey and really Jersey Shore based show, right? A lot of the Jersey Shore counties are influenced by the Pine Barrens. Pine Barrens have sandy soil. It can absorb a lot of that water easily. So, I would say depending on where you are, Palma, yes, but I do think, being at the shore counties, I'll say, because obviously the Pine Barrens aren't in Margate, but the shore counties, you do have the Pine Barrens, which helps to lessen that impact there. Now, remember, rainfall flooding is different from coastal flooding. So rain can exaggerate the coastal flooding, but it's not going to bring coastal flooding immediately. So what does drought have to do with, tidal flooding? Well, there is some thought that when you have, less fresh water in the aquifers, and the aquifers are lower or whatever, it can bring some more of that that salty water into the aquifer and harm water quality. We haven't seen anything on a significant scale for that. That would this is my opinion, I don't know this for sure, but this would probably come from if we got into a drought emergency or an exceptional drought. So the drought emergency from the NJDEP or the exceptional drought from the US Drought Monitor. So there's just kind of two things with this. One thing I just want to say too, though, and this kind of relates to coastal flooding because it involves tropical systems. The reason, in part, why we're in this drought is we didn't see any tropical systems or remnant tropical systems last summer and fall. I mean, we went August, September, October without, either a tropical storm making landfall here or more than likely a remnant storm making landfall here. We're usually good for those once or twice, a season, and we just didn't get it. And when you get into August, September, and October, if you remove the tropical moisture, you don't get thunderstorms that often because, not to get too deep into meteorology, but the sun isn't as strong. It's not heating the atmosphere, which doesn't create those towering clouds, those cumulonimbus clouds. But secondly, the cold fronts and the warm fronts, they're not all that strong. So you don't get a lot of moisture with those either. So, again, absent of the tropical moisture, it's kind of hard to rain to begin with. And then you just have to tack on that we were just in a dry pattern during that time. And we've said it before in this show, this October was the driest month in New Jersey's history. Not just October, not fall, period. And that goes back to 1895. And it wasn't just for one area. It was for all the state. So we really slipped into drought hard in October. And, November wasn't that great either. December, we were above or near average at the least, but then we kind of fell right back down in January and February. March picked it back up. And as we go into April, and especially May, when the water usage rockets up, we're going to need a lot of rain.
Right, and I think you said it perfectly. It's a double-edged sword because right now we're blessed not having major storms hitting the coast, but then you have the drought because we're not seeing enough rain.
Yeah.
So it really is a double-edged sword.
And you made some good points, Joe, there too. It's a combination, like we said, it takes a while to get into one, right? I mean, lack of tropical moisture last year. There were a lot of storms that impacted the U.S. It's just the remnants went to our west, slid to our, totally stayed clear of the Jersey Shore. Lack of nor'easters this year and this winter. And now in the spring, you can still get good coastal storms. I mean, they become harder and harder to get in April and May. And May is a tough month because you're not into hurricane season yet. You're not quite into severe weather season yet. Coastal storm season's winding down. So, if you don't get it in April, once you get into May, May's traditionally a drier month. So we're kind of hoping to make up our deficit and make some improvements, before the warmer temperatures before May and June get here. Patterns can very quickly change, but we just don't see any signs of that happening just yet.
Yeah, and just tacking on to that, like the Climate Prediction Center, which is part of NOAA, they do have a slight lean towards wetter than average conditions here, but it's a slight lean. I mean, I don't know how you feel about this. Usually for me, they're in the CP Climate Prediction Center, there's leaning above and likely above. I usually don't pay attention to it unless it's likely above, and we're just not in that as we go into the spring and in the early summer. There's not a strong lean towards a wetter than average season.
And honestly, I've been watching it through a lot of the month of March. And, they also, in addition to monthly outlooks, the Climate Prediction Center has 6 to 10 day forecasts and 8 to 14 day forecasts. And the Northeast has been in the green, a lot of late February and March. And I don't necessarily see that verifying, Northeast wide. And that's not a dig at the Climate Center. We forecasting tomorrow's weather is tough. The longer you go out, the harder it is to forecast and the more uncertainty there is. It's just, I'm just not seeing a wetter than average pattern, any beneficial or big drought denting consistent rains setting up in the Northeast anytime soon. I'm hopeful, but I just haven't seen that flip of a switch to really make some improvements. You kind of hinted at it earlier. We chipped away at our drought a little bit. We're just not consistently, we're getting enough rain where it's not getting any worse. We're not getting enough rain where it's getting dramatically better. We're just kind of holding serve, and we'd like to see more dramatic improvements, spread out over a month or two before the hot weather gets here. And the other thing, and this has less to do with tidal flooding than drought, is brush fires. Pine barrens are, the drier and the windier it is, the more fire danger becomes a concern. And it could very well be, it already is in parts of the Northeast, down in the Carolinas. It could be a very active continuation of a brush fire season as well. That's another side effect of drought.
And just adding, go ahead, Palma.
Well, we always talk about how people can prepare for a major flooding event, but is there a way that someone could prepare for a dry spell or a drought that we're experiencing?
I think it's a lot of the common sense stuff, right? You want to reduce your water usage. Don't wash your car. Bring it to the car wash. They're usually more economically viable. If you're like me, you have a monthly pass to your local car wash, and you just zip right in, and it pays for itself after 2 uses. On the agriculture side, it gets hard. I mean, if you're not in the agriculture industry, you might not realize how much, farmers go through to kind of conserve water anyway, because that's a cost, right? Water is a cost. But then in drought, it's kind of like, what more can you do? Usually when you get into a drought situation, the state, will allow agriculture to continue as needed and really put the restraint on places like golf courses or the public.
Well, thank you. I mean, I personally learned a lot about drought from this episode of Tidal Flooding Talk because it's definitely different than what we normally talk about. And again, we're brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, and we do have our show on every Tuesday night, 7 p.m. You could find us on the Triax 57 page, the Coalition's page, right here on Facebook or on our website. and welcome back to Tidal Flooding Talk. The New Jersey Coastal Coalition would like to remind our viewers to protect natural floodplains. Floodplains like salt marshes and stream beds are nature's way of managing floodwaters while improving the environment. Help them do their job. Reduce boat speeds to minimize erosion. Use fertilizers sparingly to protect water quality, and limit hard surfaces in your yard so rainwater can absorb naturally. A little effort goes a long way in protecting your community.
All right. So we were talking about some, steps for water conservation, what to do during drought. And, there's other issues with this too. And you might have seen it. People who are watching, if you have well water, your wells might be, you might have to be digging a little more than usual. I haven't heard of anybody that had to even dig deeper, literally, to get to that well water yet. Hopefully it stays that way. But that's always in the realm, of possibility. So I think a lot of it's common sense stuff. But I do think the two biggest things we as, just general public can do, the car washing itself, go to the car wash, don't wash the car yourself. And then the sprinklers, if you're going to run a sprinkler, do it like when you would want to do it anyway, during the early morning or during the evening hours. Don't do it during, the middle of the day. Once you get towards 9 a.m., that sun's picking up that water and it doesn't filter through. You might as well not have done it anyway. So, those are, I would say, my two tips. Dan, am I missing anything?
Well, I'm just going to extend, because I touched on it earlier. Drought can lead to brush fires. The pinelands are a very, can be a very tinderbox type effect when it comes to fires. We've had some really bad ones. We're not hoping for that this spring, but if the drought continues or worsens, you got the right weather, low humidity, you got wind, it can lead to brush fires. I think defensible space around your house, especially if you're in the middle of the pinelands, is a good thing to maintain. I'm a volunteer firefighter in my quote unquote free time, and that's something we pledge as well. You don't want like tons of brush and trees and flammable items that you're right up to your house. So if you can have X number of feet of defensible space, year round, just in case that fire pops up and rapidly spreads, that's something good because again, drought can be connected to fire seasons. I think you touched on all the hydrological, the water impacts and water tips. I think there's nothing else to add there.
And with the fires too, Dan, in the news, we've seen that the Forest Fire Service in New Jersey hasn't been able to conduct as many prescribed burns as they usually do because the fire conditions just haven't been as, the conditions to do it just haven't been as great because it's almost too dry and especially windy, to conduct those prescribed burns. The prescribed burns, they're a thing that Forest Fire Services do to kind of clear out the dry twigs and leaves and branches and all that stuff that if there was a wildfire to happen would make that spread, of the wildfire happen quicker. So it's a feedback loop, right? It's all feedback loop. And that's why we're hoping for, not only rain, but rain that's plentiful and spread out, over a period of time. You just don't want one big soaker a week. You really want like 3 half-inch events would be excellent if you could do that, for a few months for a few months, few weeks, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. You mentioned the wind. I mean, we keep stats on winds. We don't rank winters or time periods on based on the windiest winter ever. But, one of the reasons this winter was so cold and we had the lack of nor'easters because we had a lot of northwest wind, a lot of offshore wind. Those winds pick up as they come from the west and northwest. They're dry winds. They lower the relative humidity. It can be very gusty. I mean, Saturday, past couple of weekends, we've had some pretty windy days as well. And the wind can lead to for prescribed burn conditions and high fire danger days too. And it doesn't seem to be a let up in the wind this spring. There's a lot of brisk days for the end of March. We'll see what April holds in store. But the wind isn't necessarily a good thing, as all of this is interconnected, and we'd love to tone down that wind to keep the fire danger low and maybe allow for a little more prescribed burns to take place during the month of April as well.
And the coastal flooding low too, right? If we don't have those strong east winds, that's a lesser risk for coastal flooding.
Yeah, we've had more blowout tides, and we've had our low water advisories, as our National Weather Service guest talked about back in March. We've had more of those than we have had coastal flood advisories over the past like 3 or 4 months, and that's very unusual to be more concerned with low water rather than high water.
Yeah. See, when we've had these downpour rainstorms, I'll call them because I'm not a meteorologist, I seem to think, okay, maybe this is a sign that the drought will ease soon, but you're saying not really. We want to see it more widespread, not just, okay, overnight we get a torrential downpour and that's it.
I mean, it's like this, right? We'll take any rain we can get. But if you really want to pull out of this drought, we do need consistent rains. And they don't have to be 2-inch downpours. They can just be, like I said, 3 times a week at a ½ inch. That's beautiful. We do that for a few weeks. We're pulling out a drought at a good pace. Because that water needs to soak into the soil, needs to get into the aquifer, and if you're just raining once a week, well, yeah, some of that's going to go through, but some of it just gets evaporated and then it doesn't rain for another 6 days. And that's, again, better than nothing. We'll take it, but it's not the ideal situation.
Yep.
All right. So I think we're getting close to wrap it up here. So we're going to end off with our segment of what we are talking about, tidal flooding or otherwise. What's been going? What's the chatter been like in Dan and Palma's households and my households too over the past couple of days? Yeah, we'll kick it off with you.
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, for me, just chatter has been about the springing on up. We put in an in-ground pool, so I've been working on that, watching the tulips bloom, pop up out of the ground. All the more reason to break this drought and get some rain. Flowers are coming up, and just exciting. When you get the burst of warm weather, the longer days, we're just excited about spring. And sometimes in March and early April, you're not feeling it. We've been fortunate enough to have some warm spells, and we definitely got spring fever in the Skelton household.
When's the pool barbecue, Dan? Is there a tidal flooding talk in our future?
Pool opening. We used a heater. And we got a salt water, so we did it right. This part of the country, you got to extend the season as much as possible. So
that's right.
You guys will be invited to the pool warming party. Yeah,
that's great, and that'll be nice not to have to pack the kids up to go anywhere, go to the beach or the pool. It's just right in your backyard. So that's great. We just got back from Washington D.C. We went there for the Flyers Capitals game on Thursday night.
How'd that go?
Well, the Flyers did not win, but it did turn into a game towards the end, so it was still fun. And then we had a concert, Gregory Alan Isikoff, on Friday night. So it was a very nice time away. The weather was pleasant, so we had a great time.
All right. I'll do the flip side of Palma here. My Washington Capitals, first place in the NHL, and we're going into playoff season. That's all I got to say. We'll wrap it up from there. Flyers were no match for the Capitals. Let's put it that way.
No, I thought we were friends.
We are, just not when the Flyers play the Capitals. We're friends today, just not on that Thursday. We were. All right, take us out, Pavel. We'll wrap it on up.
All right. Well, thank you for watching Tidal Flooding Talk. Again, we're brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition and Triax 57. Tune in every Tuesday night at 7 p.m.
I'll see you guys next Tuesday. Have a good night.